All right, everybody. There we go. We are live. You are live. You are looking live. At Everybody Settle Down. I'm Charlie Marlow. That is the great Eric Messersmith talking everything election, news, politics, the odds, the polls. But Eric, I want to start with this because it's still trending right now. This Bret Baier Fox News interview with Kamala Harris. I was on X last night, and all the right wing pundits said it was the worst interview in the history of the world. And then people on the left said she did great. You're pretty reasonable. So what'd you think, buddy?
Well, I thought it was fine. And I know that, I probably should have a hot take. And again, whenever we talk about this, full disclosure, I appear on Fox News every couple weeks. I used to work with the organization as a sports reporter. My wife works there. So, to full disclosure. Look, it was a tough interview, but I think that was good for Harris. She needed that. One of my first thoughts was she should have done this or something similar to this a month ago. She should go on Joe Rogan. There's been rumors that she's talking about that and debating that. I'm glad she's doing these hostile interviews. I wish she would have done them sooner because I think in some ways she's almost better in these settings when she's being challenged, when she, kind of has to have her back against the wall a little bit. I thought some of her answers were really good. I think hitting Trump, especially with, that audience, maybe people who tune in who may still be undecided, some Republicans who just can't quite stomach Trump but aren't sure on Harris. I thought she presented herself as tough, as intelligent, kind of different than the caricature that, Trump and some in the right have made her out to be. So that was the positive for Harris. On the negative side, I still feel like some of her answers are overly rehearsed. I think she's overly tentative on certain answers. Like the immigration one is a good example. There's no great way for her to answer that question because the border has been a mess up until the last few months when the Biden administration finally started to institute executive orders that really cut down on the numbers. Up until then, though, it's been a mess. And look, she has some things she can point to, like the immigration bill that Trump killed, which she always goes back to, which is a fair point, and I think worth talking about. But I think she could have given a more nuanced subject, a more nuanced answer on that by saying something like, hey, look, I want to solve the illegal immigration problem. I recognize there's been a problem, but let's talk about where we are now. But also, hey, we need immigration. We're having fewer babies. We need more workers. It's helping our economy to have immigration. Let's talk about the positives of immigration too, and let's try to pass a big comprehensive bill that would deal with both sides of that. Do you think Donald Trump's going to be able to get that done? Has he shown you any history that would lead you to believe that he's the person who's going to be able to negotiate a real long-term fix for this issue? I feel like she kind of missed an opportunity there to both hit Trump, but also give a more complete picture of immigration rather than just being on the defensive in terms of trying to get out of what's something that's tough to get out of, which is the pretty terrible record of the Biden administration on illegal immigration over the first 3.5 years. So I think that was kind of a missed opportunity. And maybe also, although this is harder on the question of Biden and Biden's cognitive decline and the fact that she came out so forcefully saying it wasn't true, that's, again, a tough spot for her because we all saw the debate, right? We all know why Joe Biden is not the candidate and she is. And so it's tough for her to just come out and say, well, look, you saw the debate. He's not up for this. But maybe there's a way to where you could say something like, look, Joe, I've seen Joe Biden up close in the Situation Room. I've seen him talk to leaders on the phone. I've seen him in these meetings. He has a command of these issues. He still is making good decisions on policy. But that's different than the rigors of a campaign at almost 82 years old when you would be running for a 4-year term that would run through when you were 86. By the way, my opponent is 78 and just gave a town hall meeting in Pennsylvania where he stopped it after 5 questions because some people had fainted and played music and kind of bobbed around for 40 minutes. Well, he'll be 82, my opponent, if he were to, when his term would run, if he were to win. So I think there were ways to be more flexible on particularly those two issues. But in order to do it, you have to at least partially admit the vulnerability. And this goes back to what I've said before, how I think politicians are, and Harris is not alone in this, but I think she's particularly guilty of it sometimes. They it's almost like a default mindset where they think I can't give an inch. I can't admit any vulnerability at all, because if I do, my opponents will jump on me. But here's the secret. Your opponents are going to jump on you anyway. They are going to rip you apart no matter what you say. Who you are targeting your message to is that maybe 4 or 5% of people who are truly undecided, who actually will probably decide who wins the presidency. Those people might like it if you were willing to admit partially that, okay, yeah, there's a point to what you're saying. And I acknowledge that, but let me explain it in a way that will point to a broader context. You see what I'm saying? So I think that that's a missed opportunity for her, not just in this interview, but kind of overall throughout the campaign. So bottom line, I think she did fine. I don't think she hurt herself. I certainly don't think it was the kind of disaster that Republicans on X painted it out to be. And I would just say, again, look at the contrast. I mean, have you seen a Donald Trump interview? Like, he is incapable of giving coherent, long answers on pretty much any subject. He does the weave, as he calls it, right? Where he talks about 5 different things and usually none of them relate to the question that was asked. And so I think it's just silly to say, well, Kamala Harris can't do an interview when we've seen it. But I don't even think it's about that anymore. You know, it's about the tribalism. You put your team jersey on and you just react to what you see based on, you know, what you think your team's position is.
Sure. Couple things. First of all, I earlier this week watched Donald Trump on the Andrew Schulz, the Flagrant podcast, which was good. It was funny. Schulz is a comedian. It was about 90 minutes, tons of commercials though. So probably more like 60, 70 minutes of the actual interview. But I thought Donald Trump actually did give some cogent answers, but he laughed about that weave the whole time. Like he kept bringing up the weave, how he does it on purpose. So look, I don't think at this point Donald Trump is giving great answers either. I do think he's capable. I think with both of them, it's totally overblown by the other side about how terrible they are. And then so going to last night's interview, I just watched it. It's 27 minutes long. I just watched it literally right before we started because I wanted to make sure I watched the whole thing. And again, I'm on X last night and they're like, Kamala's done. It was the worst interview ever. And look, you're going into hostile territory on Fox News. And I was writing down the topics. Immigration was at least 10 or 11 minutes of the interview, right? It was a 27-minute interview. And it wasn't until they switched over to, you know, trans prisoners getting sex change. That was the next topic. But then it was economy, talking about Biden, basically kind of losing it. Asked her about what country's the biggest threat. She said Iran. But look, so a couple of those topics at the end. Economy, you know, who's the biggest threat? Those are general questions. But there weren't, and I expected this, there weren't any topics that were favorable to Kamala Harris, right? But look, that's what you'd expect. Everybody knows. It doesn't matter if you're left, right, in the middle. Everybody knows that immigration is Donald Trump and the Republicans' best issue, right? So it makes sense that Fox News is going to grill her on it for 10 or 11 minutes. On the other hand, everybody knows that abortion, female reproductive rights, is a Democrat's best issue. If she goes on a podcast there, she's probably going to get a third of the questions on that. Clearly, Fox News is not going to ask her anything about that because it's a strength for her and her campaign. So I bring all those things up saying every topic was something that put her on the defensive, which, by the way, I'm fine with. I'm totally fine with that. But knowing that and watching her go back at Bret Baier, I do think he interrupted her quite a bit. I thought she was pretty forceful. I thought she kept saying, hey, let me finish my response. So I thought she did well. Again, is she going to gain votes? I don't know. Is she going to lose votes? I think she gets credit for doing it 100%. But I watched it, and here's where I agree with you. I just wonder, like, can she admit, because we all know that the Biden administration was terrible on immigration for the first couple years. Does she lose anything by admitting that because everybody's saying it anyway? But then you bring up that these women lost their lives. They were killed by illegal immigrants. So you're almost admitting to it being your fault that it happens. Yeah, I wish politicians would just admit when they're wrong, but that's where I did say, like,
Yeah.
she could be better in her responses and then pivot to
Right.
pretend like the whole immigration issue was only about this bill. That's just a lie. Like, Bret Baier was correct in saying, no, you overturned whatever it was, these 90 executive orders, and the border got worse right away. And Bret Baier is right in saying that.
Yeah, look, I think there is a way to thread that needle. It's not easy, but you made the point. You're going to own it anyway. You
Yeah.
will own the Biden immigration record for better or worse, no matter what you say. So that is why I think it's important. You don't have to go into detail about how awful things have been, but you can say, look, so for instance, he brought it up with the context of Remain in Mexico, which was one
Mhm.
of the big executive orders that was overturned. And that was the policy that basically said immigrants will have to wait either in detention in the United States or in Mexico while their asylum claims are processed, right? There are problems with that, right? There are humanitarian problems with that. That is not a perfect solution. So she could have said, look, I didn't agree with Remain in Mexico. I have a better solution. Here it is. And again, circle it back to the question is, where do we go now? How do we go forward? Like, for instance, these were executive actions, which by definition, whether they're done by Trump or Biden, are temporary. That's the problem with trying to handle this issue by executive action, is it flips back and forth from administration to administration. It's being challenged in the courts constantly. What Biden is doing right now that has limited the numbers, that may be overturned by the court in a few months. These things are not a guarantee. They are not a fix. And that is the point I think she could have hammered home. She could have said, we need a bill to do this, to get it through Congress, to negotiate, to compromise. Do you think Donald Trump is going to give you that? What evidence has he ever shown you that he can do that? And I think that is ground that would at least give her a chance, to fight on that issue.
Sure. So just kind of watching, do you think first of all that Kamala will actually go on Joe Rogan? And do you think we'll see Trump? Will he do any type of interview on a CNN or an MSNBC, kind of like Kamala did last night? And I guess another part of that question is, does he need to? We'll get to this, but if you look at the betting odds, Kamala is really tanking. I'm not really sure if I totally believe that. So what do you think? You think we're just going to see Trump do all these podcasts and call
Yeah.
into Fox and Friends until the end?
Absolutely. That's been his strategy. And that kind of gets back to, again, the contrast. Like, for a while, she wasn't doing interviews and it was fair to call her out. Now she's everywhere. And Trump still is doing interviews, but he's almost exclusively on friendly territory now.
Mhm.
He hasn't done an interview on a mainstream outlet, quote unquote, in about a month. And now look, he does do some hostile exchanges. He had the NABJ earlier this summer. He had a Bloomberg at the Chicago Economic Forum or Business Forum the other day that got kind of contentious, and he was really pushed on it. So he does do it from time to time. But could you imagine the equivalent? Like, let's say Trump had gone on MSNBC or even CNN with like Jake Tapper and sat for 30 minutes. What would that have been like? I mean, how would he have reacted? We know how he would have reacted. We've seen it. He would belittle the person asking him the questions. He would have gotten angry. And like Kamala Harris, to her credit, she was tough, but she didn't really do that. Like, she reacted differently than he would have in that situation. And so I can't imagine Trump going on the equivalent right now of what she did last night. And that's a change because he used to do those interviews. And I think he feels like he doesn't have to anymore. And to JD Vance's credit, Vance does those interviews. Vance goes on ABC, CBS, NBC. So I think, to a broader point, one of the reasons I like this last night just is because I think we need more of this. We need more of candidates going into an environment where they are going to be challenged and they are going to be asked some hostile questions. And I wish Harris had done this earlier. I'm glad she's doing it now. I hope she goes on Rogan. I think she probably will. And I think Trump should do the same, but I don't think he will, because I think he thinks he's pretty much got the election in the bag, which I don't agree with, but I think that's what he believes. And so he feels like he doesn't have to and he doesn't want to. But that's a change because, look, these things used to be a lot more frequent. I remember growing up, and following politics in I remember like Bill O'Reilly Barack Obama going on Bill O'Reilly before the election. I remember even Trump in 2016, he was all over CNN and MSNBC. And gradually we've lost that. I mean, remember 60 Minutes, which, say what you will about CBS, every presidential candidate of the two major parties has gone on 60 Minutes in October of the election year since 1968 until this year, when Kamala Harris did, but Donald Trump initially agreed to and then backed out. So I think that we're losing something when everybody just retreats into their media silos and they only go on friendly media. And so for that reason alone, I think that the interview last night was significant in our politics.
Sure. And here's what really bothers me about the media coverage. And I understand why people on the right, they lash out at mainstream media over the years. There's a lot of relevancy to that. I feel like in the world I live in, though, which is X and YouTube, I think especially it's not just an Elon Musk thing with X, it's that it's monetized now, right? It's that it's engagement farming. And what you and I do, I think we're both pretty reasonable. We try to be fair. Of course, everybody has their leanings, everybody has their biases, but I don't see a lot of fair coverage with nuance, right? And so again, I was really excited to watch the interview, and it was what I expected, actually. Knowing that everybody on the right said it was horrible and people on the left, oh, it was a home run. And then I watched it, I'm like, it's kind of what I expected. And I just feel like it's hard to find fairness. And I'm talking about people in the opinion game that are just being nuanced and reasonable. And the reason I say that is because there's no money in that. And I mean,
Right.
I hope someday that our channel, there's money in that, but like there really isn't money in that.
Yep.
What the spot where all the money is basically catering to your 40-45%, going crazy. Everybody gets destroyed. Everybody gets owned and all that. All the headlines are, you got dunked on. But the funny thing is, you already have those people's votes, right? I truly believe it's the reasonable, nuanced folks who are kind of interested, who don't know a ton about the candidates. Like those are the people that are really going to swing the election. So doing interviews like this actually matter, I think, for the people that are going to decide this election. And they do want to watch things with some fairness, right? They do want to watch these things with a critical eye. They're not the people that are on the extremes of both sides. So I think it's smart.
Yeah. I think it's smart too. Look, I don't think there's any going back in the media landscape because people have figured out the profit model. And look,
Yes.
Human beings are incentivized. We respond very well to incentives, especially when it comes to money. And that's just a fact. And so the pressure on media organizations, big and small, on people who do political commentary, there's pressure. Let's be honest about it. Like, you have to serve your audience to some degree. And that is just the reality of the media environment we live in. I don't know how to change those incentives because I don't believe that the government should be involved with the media. I believe media should be done mainly and almost exclusively in the free market. And so I don't think there's any good way to change those incentives. I think what we talked about before, I think the way you change the incentives is on the political side with something like ranked choice voting, where people have to appeal more to a broader segment of the electorate. Getting rid of gerrymandering, that would also help. So there are things I think you can do to change the incentives on the political side, but not so much the media side. I think Chan, the man, has a comment here that I want to respond to that I think ties into what we're saying. He said, low-skill mass immigration has been shown countless times in Europe that it's a net negative on the economy. When Kamala says she wants to fix illegal immigration, she means mass amnesty. Look, I can't speak to Europe. I know they have a lot of problems with immigration. I'm not as familiar with exactly what the studies show there. I have seen studies that have shown that immigration consistently is a net positive for the country economically. Doesn't mean it's a total positive. There are obviously major drawbacks, and it should be done in an orderly fashion. But I think immigration as a whole is a net gain for our country. I think it always has been, and I think it especially will be in the future when population continues to decline from low birth rates. But at the end, he talks about she means mass amnesty. Well, here's what I would say, and this is, I think, the point Harris could make to appeal to the kind of voters you're talking about. How do you get a result? How do you fix the problem? And again, this is what I would go back to if I were her, not just with the bill. I mean, she points to that bill that was a bipartisan bill that, let's be honest, if Donald Trump had not come out forcefully against that, it would have passed. I know people point to the opposition, and there was some opposition, but the Border Patrol Union supported it. It would have cut the asylum process down to 6 months. That's the biggest problem right now is people claim asylum. They're released in the country. They're given a court date for 4, 5, 6, 7 years in the future. This bill would have made it so all asylum claims would be adjudicated in 6 months or less. That alone would have transformed the immigration system. So I think it's not just this bill, though. I think to Chan the man's point, she should say, look, the reality is this is only going to get fixed if you have a large deal where Democrats and Republicans come together to, yes, address illegal immigration, but also deal with the millions of people that are here in this country illegally. And some of them will have to be deported, but they're not all going to be deported. We are never deporting 20 million people. I don't care who the president is. It is not going to happen. So, and it shouldn't happen. Someone who's been here for 20 or 30 years who was brought here like the dreamers through no fault of their own as a kid and now is in college or has a job or that's ludicrous and counterproductive to try to deport all those people. So we need a bill that will fix it. And if I were Harris, what I would go back to again and again is Donald Trump was president for 4 years. What did he ever show you that would lead you to believe he could pass a huge bipartisan piece of legislation to fix a problem? I mean, he couldn't even get infrastructure done, which is like the easiest layup in politics. Every politician wants to spend a lot of money to fix roads, bridges, airports. Trump talked about it. He wanted to do it. Didn't happen. Guess when it did happen? When Joe Biden was president. And this is what I would go back to as Harris, is make the argument on who can get the things done that need to get done in a closely divided country, which is what we are.
Here's where I think, though, that's not as much of a winning argument as you think it is, even though I agree with you. I don't think a lot of people, I don't want to say they don't care, but it's more about vibes to them, right? It's more about how they feel. So again, reasonable people know that all these things that the Biden administration passed, which, by the way, are going to help out this country for the next 10 years. We're talking about infrastructure. We're talking about CHIPS and Science Act and all that. That is going to help out Americans for the next 10 years. But you're not necessarily going to feel a lot of that right now, right? And that border bill, they absolutely should have passed that. 100%. Two things can be true at the same time. But I think it's also pretty obvious that all that the Biden administration had to do was clean up the border. There were things they could do themselves that they clearly did this year without passing that bill that made the border much, much safer. So even though I'm with you, and I said they should have passed this bill 100%, and everybody who's being fair knows that Donald Trump tanked this bill strictly for political reasons. The border was safer and more secure under Donald Trump than it was under Biden and Harris, and people felt that, right? Yeah. So like the idea of this bill, okay, that's great. I wish they would have passed it, but it also doesn't change what happened in 21, 22, and 23 when the border was really, really bad. And that is the Biden administration's fault.
And I think, look, I've said this before, and I think Trump said this the other day, that he actually thinks immigration is the most important issue, not the economy. And I think I agree with him. If he wins, people will point to the inflation. They'll point to the candidate switch. They'll point to whatever shortcomings they perceive Harris to have. They'll point to Trump's hold over, white working class voters and rural voters. And all those things may or may not be true. Many of them, I think, are. But I think at the end of the day, if Trump wins, it will be because of the chaos of the border for the first 3 years. I think what that did is that sent a signal to even kind of people who are generally pro-immigration, or at least neutral, that there is chaos and there is disorder. And one thing people don't like, and I agree with them, is chaos and disorder. And clearly, in hindsight, what the Biden administration should have done when it was clear, because they did propose a comprehensive bill when they came in. But look, we have the filibuster in the Senate. There's no way Republicans were going to go for that. The filibuster wasn't going to be repealed. So once it became obvious that that wasn't going to happen and the numbers started to rise, because if you go back and look at the graph, to be fair, the numbers were rising when Trump was president. So if Trump always points to that chart. Remember the chart that famously saved his life in Pennsylvania?
Yes.
This is hilarious. It's kind of it's not that big of a deal, but it's so funny. That chart is not accurate because the bar on the chart, it's so funny. Like the chart he pointed to that he always brings up that saved his life. If you actually look at it, and I have, it's fake news. The chart points to a date and says this is when Trump left office. It's not when he left office. It's like 6 months before he left office when the numbers were at their lowest.
So COVID.
So COVID, right, because nobody during the early days of COVID was going anywhere, let alone across the border, right? So then what happened is over the last 6, 7, 8 months of his administration, the numbers started going up and up and up of people illegally crossing the border. And then during Biden, COVID starts to wane and there's mass migration all over the world and Biden has more lax policies and now the numbers explode. So what Biden should have done in hindsight, obviously, is 6 months in, be like, look, I want an immigration reform bill. We need to do it. But in the meantime, until we have that, we just can't have this level of chaos and disorder at the border. And I'm going to institute executive actions to slow it down and try to stop it. That's what they should have done. And not doing that and waiting until 2024 to do it when it's clear that it's motivated by the election, I think is the biggest mistake of the Biden administration. I think it is the thing that will lose them the election if they lose Harris the election and would have lost Biden the election, had he stayed in, obviously other than his, mental decline. But I'm saying on the issues.
Other than that,
I'm saying if he had not had that and he lost, it would be because of immigration. I think the economy's gotten a lot better. The numbers across the board are way better than they were a year ago. Most things are trending in the right direction. I think she could have fought Trump to close to a draw on that. I think independent experts have overwhelmingly said her economic policies are better than his. I mean, it's not even worth getting. I know Republicans don't, J.D. Vance said we don't believe in experts anymore at the debate, but I think she could have fought him to a draw on the economy. She has the abortion issue, but the immigration issue, man, it just, people can't, and I get it. I'm the same way. I'm very pro-immigrant. I want the comprehensive bill. I want to give legal status to the people that have been here a long time, that have been working and contributing. We need more immigration in this country. It's essential for us because we're not having children. We're not going to be able to fund the retirement program, Social Security, Medicare. We're not going to be able to do that if we don't bring in more people. But it has to be orderly. And I think so many people just looked at that and said, we can't have this chaos. And I may not like Donald Trump, but he'll fix that. He will find a way, at least until the courts throw it out, to fix it.
And our guy, Chan the Man, I want to read this comment too, because I disagree with him here. He says, here's the problem with the immigration debate. It's no longer a binary of legal versus illegal. I don't know anyone who is against legal, high-skill immigrants. Mass, low-skill migrants are net negative. And to me, it is still about legal versus illegal. And if you're talking about, I'm not going to say low skill, but I know what you mean. Here's what it comes down to. I do want those low skill, whatever you want to call them, folks in legally, because here's why. Let's really be honest about this. Native born Americans aren't doing a lot of these jobs, and they don't want to do a lot of these jobs. And if you're talking about the food service, if we're talking about people in the fields, honestly, picking foods, we're talking about the hotel industry, nannies, childcare. Again, I already mentioned food service. We do need those workers. And a lot of people that are born in the United States of America, they simply don't want to do those jobs. It's as simple as that. So I disagree with Chan the Man there. And look, clearly immigration is the best issue for Trump. And it probably will be the reason Trump wins again if he does. And I said it earlier. The Bret Baier interview was less than 27 minutes. And I didn't look at it exactly, but I was looking at my phone, and I think they did immigration for at least the first 11 minutes, whatever it was, 10 and a half, 11. It wasn't until about 11, 12 minutes that they moved on from immigration. That shows you right there. Republicans, Fox News, they know what's in their wheelhouse. It is clearly immigration. And here's where I'll also say, as somebody who's pro-legal immigration, and just so everybody knows, like, I grew up a Democrat. I grew up in a middle-class family like Kamala Harris, okay? No, but I say this.
How was your lawn?
My lawn was, you know what? I cut the lawn. I cut the lawn. My dad paid me. So, again, this gets back to incentives. incentives. We had a big backyard. I think I'd get $21 to cut my whole lawn.
Oh
Front
my
yard was
God.
$7. Dude, we
With
had an acre.
inflation, that's like $200 today with inflation.
I know, but look, this is an acre basically. It's almost an acre, and it's a push mower.
Oh my God. Well, we
So
know
the backyard,
you grew up. We know you grew up blessed, to have such a massive amount of property.
Hashtag blessed. No, but I bring that up because I only said I grew up a Democrat because I think people understand you lean certain ways, you offer your side the benefit of the doubt. After a while, and by the way, this all happened. I was on the radio every day on a show that talked a decent amount of politics. And I do think with some issues, you can argue the side of Democrats or Republicans, right? You can kind of defer. But it got to a point with immigration that I could no longer argue the Democrat side, So I didn't, by the way, because I'm not a freaking partisan hack. But again, here's somebody who's growing up as a Democrat who could no longer defend Biden's policy on immigration. I think that shows you how bad it was. Don't you think?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And that's why I say it is the big issue we will point to if they lose, or we should point to. I think people will point to many other things that aren't going to be as important at the end of the day as that issue. Look, the truth is we need both. We need, yes, high-skilled immigration, sure, but we do need low-skilled immigration. Not to the extent that it is now where we're just, people are flooding the country. It has to be orderly and legal, but we need both because as you point out, two things are happening. Number one, people, like for instance, let's just say you deported every illegal immigrant in the country tomorrow or in a week, right? Everyone. What do you think would happen to the food service industry, the construction industry? Do you know the estimates of the number of people in those industries? It's like 20, 30%. I mean, you wouldn't be able to go to a restaurant. Like restaurants would have to close. You think we have a housing shortage now? You think we don't build enough houses now? What do you think would happen? And yes, would some of those jobs be filled by native-born people? Sure. Wages would go up for some of those jobs, and you would have some fill them. But there aren't enough people to do it. Again, in part because we aren't having babies. That's the other part of this. If we didn't have immigration, our population would decline. We would be like Italy or South Korea. We would have a declining, aging population. That is a recipe for disaster because you can't, like, Social Security and Medicare aren't funded by the people's contributions who paid into it that are getting it now. That money's gone. It's funded by you and me and everybody working. And that is like a Ponzi scheme that will collapse if we don't have new people. So you need both. You need lots of high-skilled people. I agree with that. Trump, to his credit, has talked about that. Trump has talked about giving a green card to people who come here to go to college and finish school. I think that's a great idea. I support it. But we do need low-skilled, or I hate to use that term, but we do need people to do lots of different jobs in this country. That's just the bottom line. And until our birth rate changes, that's going to be the case. And it's not going to change. Once birth rates go down, we've seen this across the world. Once women are given access to birth control, education, once societies change in that way, it typically doesn't reverse. And I don't think it's reversing in America. I don't think we're all going to start having, I don't think we're all going to, start having turn into Elon Musk here, having 7 or 8 kids. I just don't think that's going to happen. I think we have to be realistic about it. And yes, do it in an orderly way. Absolutely. But again, my point is Donald Trump going to get that kind of bill through Congress? Because here's the thing. The Republicans are going to win the Senate, probably. The House could go either way. But let's say Trump's president and he has a Republican House barely and a barely Republican Senate. You need 60 votes to do anything. Is he going to negotiate with Democrats, make the compromises, pass the big bill on immigration or anything else that would really fix the problem long term? I just don't see there's no history of that. There's no history. Now, look, maybe Donald Trump all of a sudden will completely change who he is at 78 years old, and he'll be this kind of guy who can bring people together to get these big things done. But I don't see any evidence of that.
And I bring this up half jokingly, but because we're talking about immigration and workers and legal versus illegal, I have 2 buddies, and if they're watching, they know exactly who they are. Live in Chicago. Both have construction companies. Both hardcore Republicans and Trump and all that. And we have all these text chains going. I mean, they 100% have illegal immigrants on their crews.
Oh,
and look,
absolutely.
They can show the paperwork. It's very easy to forge. All I'm saying is these same people who are very pro-Trump and they're very much against illegal immigration, their companies and themselves, they're 1000% benefiting from their illegal workers, who are good workers, by the way. And everybody wants the criminals out, right? Everybody wants the criminals out. It's hard to find good work these days, too, though.
Do you know the best argument for some of Trump's policies is he won't do what he says? Because I honestly think there are people, like, I don't think he will either. Like, I do not, let's say Trump wins. I don't think he's deporting 20 million people. I
No
don't,
chance.
or 15 million. First of all, it's logistically almost impossible, the amount of resources and money. So I think many people, because look, he has a decent amount of support in the tech industry, a lot wealthy people. I mean, billionaires. There were 3 billionaires, Musk and a few others, that donated hundreds of $millions to his campaign. Some Wall Street people. I think they don't believe he's going to do what he actually says he's going to do on immigration, on tariffs. So they think it's more kind of like, well, he's just making a general point and he's just kind of throwing out. Like, if he put a 10 or 20% across the board tariff on everything, that would be an economic disaster. It would raise the prices on everything. It would be a huge calamity for our country. I don't think he's going to do that. I think he'll use it maybe as a negotiating tactic, but he says he is. That's the thing. He says, I'm going to do this. He says, I'm going to deport all these illegal immigrants. I don't think he'll actually do it, but do I know for sure? No. And the effects would be devastating. If he actually did what he said he was going to do, it would be, like I said, you think we have a housing crisis now? Could you imagine what it would do to the construction industry? I mean, we wouldn't be building anything. You're not going to hire that many people when you have an unemployment rate already of 4%. I mean, if we had an unemployment rate of 10 or 15 or 20%, sure, but we don't. We have very, very low unemployment right now in America. We have rising wages right now in America. We have low inflation right now in America, as we sit here. And so I just think that a lot of what Trump says, I think his supporters who are more sophisticated, let's say, like the people on Wall Street, I don't think they actually believe he's going to do what he says he's going to do. But I think his hardcore supporters do believe him, which is going to make things really interesting if he actually wins.
Okay, but do you really think that? And I say that because even if you're a hardcore Trumper, and let's say immigration is your number one issue, Trump said we're going to build a wall. Mexico's going to pay for it. He clearly did not build, a little bit of a wall, nothing like the wall that he said he was going to build, and Mexico didn't pay for it. That being said, Trump is still the much better candidate on immigration. So I think most of his people are like, you know what? He's going to get rid of some of the criminal element, right? There's going to be a better vetting process at the border. But yes, there's not going to be a deportation of 20 million people. I don't even think the hardcore Trumpers believe that anymore. And I say that because he didn't build the wall. Mexico didn't pay for it. He's still better on immigration, and they still love him. So I do think they realize some of this, he's embellishing. He's trying to be funny at his rallies. Like, he doesn't really mean everything word for word.
Right. Well, it goes back to the best thing I think that was ever said about Trump. And I would like to give the person credit. I don't remember who said it. It was a journalist, that Trump supporters take him seriously, but not literally. And his critics take him literally, but not seriously. And I get that. I get that argument. And I think there is truth to that argument. Again, if I had to bet, do I think Trump would actually do the things he says he's going to do on mass deportation? No, I don't. I don't think he will. I think he'll deport some people. I mean, remember, Barack Obama deported millions of people. Even under this administration, which has let a lot of people in, they've deported millions of people. So deporting millions of people is not a huge change from the status quo. So I don't think he'll deport anywhere near 15 million people. I don't think nowhere close. I don't think he'll impose across the board tariffs. I think he'll realize that is a very bad idea economically. I think he'll try to use it maybe as a negotiating tactic, which actually isn't a crazy idea. But he doesn't. But here's the thing. He doesn't say that. He says, I'm going to impose the tariffs. He says, I'm going to deport the people. And he doesn't get into specifics. And that's kind of the thing about Trump is, how can you believe what he will or won't do? Like, as we saw on January 6th, the man's willing to do pretty much anything to stay in power, to keep power. How do you trust anything that he says that he will or will not do? So I'm making a guess on what I think he would do, just because I think it would be practically and politically, almost impossible to do the things he says. But, do I know for sure? No, I don't think anybody does, because I think Trump is often influenced by how he feels that day, who the last person is to talk to him, who flatters him the most. I mean, that gets to kind of some of the critiques I think Harris made very effectively in the debate is this man is susceptible to those things. Now, we all are as human beings to some extent, but he's uniquely susceptible, let's say, to those things.
All right, we have cited the betting odds ever since we started this show back in January. So let's continue there. And I mean, this is surprising to me how it's switched like that. I'm not sure I believe it, but look, we cited these when Biden was up, when Biden was down, when Trump was up, when Harris was up and down. So here it is right now, up to the minute. Donald Trump with a 57.1% chance of winning. Kamala Harris, 42%. Let's just round up. Let's call it 57-43 because there's a 0.7% undecided there. I guess my question is, and I've said all along, I never thought Donald Trump didn't have a chance to win, but it's surprising to me when the odds have shifted. I understand there were positive vibes for Kamala out of the gate, right? You had the bounce there, you had the bump, Tim Walz, good early, JD Vance, bad early, that kind of flipped. But also, clearly Kamala Harris defeated Donald Trump in the debate, but kind of since Vance beat Walz, and I'm not saying that's the reason, I mean, that's an important data point, but ever since then, we've seen this shift. After the debate where Harris beat Trump, it was like 56-44, whatever. Let's say 55-45 Harris. And now it's flipped even more towards Trump. And I just think it's kind of odd because we haven't really had that many big events. So I guess are people just saying, I've seen enough of Harris. She's starting to do interviews. I'm not liking what she's saying. I don't know. It's just kind of odd to me that it's shifted like this now. And if Donald Trump ends up winning, okay, but I feel like those odds weren't accurate back then, though, because I don't know. I don't see so many people shifting over the last 3 weeks. I don't feel like there's been any seismic events that would cause that. What do you think?
Well, I agree. I think we're talking about two different things. The vibes have shifted and the underlying fundamentals have both shifted toward Trump. But the shifts haven't been equal. What I mean by that is the vibes have shifted way more than the underlying fundamentals. And that's the difference I think you see between the betting markets, which are, depending on which one you look at, you did the aggregate there, 55-45. Some have it close to 60-40. They've shifted a lot or a decent amount. But the polling averages have changed in Trump's favor in the last week, but not that much, a point or so nationally and in some of the battlegrounds. And in fact, if you look at the election prediction models, which I'm a big Nate Silver fan, he has it 50-50. Now, that's an improvement for Trump because a week or so ago or 2 weeks ago, Harris was at 57-58%. But that's not a dramatic shift. That's still basically a coin flip where we've been. I think what you're seeing is the race is where it was always going to be. And what I mean by that is I just think barring some event that is just so, at this point, I don't even know what it could be. Like some event that would be so cataclysmic to our politics in a good way or bad way that would just shake everybody to their core. I think this was always probably where we were going to be. Like, if you look at history, I mean, look, what do they say? Like the best predictor of, future is past performance. Donald Trump has run as a candidate twice. We have hard data on this, right? And in both elections, he got between 46 and 47% of the popular vote. And in both elections, the Electoral College was decided by less than 100,000 votes in a few states. Why would we think this would be any different? Like, if anything, we've gotten more and more partisan. People are more and more locked into their team and tribe. And so I know a lot of events have happened, like Joe Biden dropping out, the assassination attempt. These are wild events, historically speaking. But I don't know that they change the fundamentals of who the electorate is and how the country is divided. And so if you have two straight elections where a guy is running and it's decided by less than 100,000 votes in a few states, why would you assume that then the third election with the same guy in a row would be much different? So in some ways, I think we're reverting to the mean. But we have to be clear, there is a shift toward Trump. And look, Fox News, again, we talk about Fox. Fox has a very, I know their reputation as a conservative outlet, but their polling reputation is very good. They use a Republican and a Democratic pollster. They have a very high rating, among the highest rated pollsters. They came out yesterday, Trump 50, Harris 48 nationally. That's the first poll other than Rasmussen that has had Trump ahead in weeks. I mean, so it's a little bit of an outlier, but I think it shows you that the momentum is with Trump slightly. Not enough to fundamentally alter, I think, the conception of this race being very close, but it is slightly with him. And again, I think there is this lingering, looking at the past, there is this lingering thought that Trump will outperform his October polls like he did in 2016 and 2020. And Real Clear Politics today, their average on October 2016, Clinton +7, she won by 2. So Trump did 5 points better than the polling in October of 2016. Biden was up 9 in their average on October 17th of 2020. Trump did 4.5 points better. If he does anything close to that this year, he will win. I mean, if he does 2 or 3 points better than his polling right now, he'll win all the swing states probably. So I think people, again, look at that past and they say, hey, it's happened twice where he's overperformed his October polling. Now, you could argue polling is better now. The pollsters have learned their lessons. You could argue there aren't as many shy Trump. They should be better, right? And they might be. They adjust. They try to, get it even better than they have before. And also maybe the shy Trump voter, the person who didn't really want to tell a pollster he was going to vote for Trump or she was going to vote for Trump or wouldn't answer the phone. Maybe now they're enthusiastic to tell everybody, yeah, I'm voting for Trump. I think there's some evidence to that Trump has become kind of more acceptable in a lot of circles, support for Trump than it used to be. So that might be true as well. So I'm not saying it's a shoo-in that he will overperform his polling. He might not. The polling error may actually be in Harris's favor this year. You don't know. It was in 2022. It was a Democratic lean in a polling error. So that could happen again. But I'm saying these are the things I think people in the betting markets are thinking, the kind of vibes that people are feeling is Harris just didn't ever get that strong, sustained lead. The momentum was there for her after big events, and then it kind of petered out.
Yeah, I try to go, I know we joke about vibes. I try to go more on what's really happening in my life than on social media. And that's where I just feel like this push towards Trump in the last 2-3 weeks, and I'm not saying Trump's not going to win, but it feels much bigger than it actually is because I'm feeling it on social media. I'm feeling it specifically on Twitter/X. When I go about my real life, grocery store, go to the bank, what are interest rates doing? Again, the world's not perfect, but I don't feel a vibe shift in my actual life. And so that's where I just wonder about this. I also think, look, this sets the stage. We both agree on this. And I don't know how you disagree at this point. There ain't no way if Donald Trump loses that he's not going to claim that this is all rigged and all that, especially now, because the vibes on social media and YouTube and all the podcasters, because the vibes are now so much towards Trump. If Harris is able to win this, it gives even more credence to the fact that this thing is rigged because all the polls and all the betting odds have shifted towards Trump in the last 2-3 weeks or so. And then one more thing. I was listening to this interview. Is it Major Garrett? Is Major Garrett the guy, the reporter for, is it CBS?
I believe, yeah, he used to be with Fox. I believe he is with CBS.
Okay.
Now. Yeah.
So he did an interview with a local radio station in St. Louis I just happened to listen to, and it was like a really good interview. It wasn't biased. It was very data driven. Yeah. It was about early voting and how you can't make too many conclusions you can draw from that and all that. But he said something very interesting because they were talking about, the shy Trump voter. Are the people who didn't want to answer a poll and said that it would vote for Trump in 2016, are they going to answer the poll now? Sure. I think there's less shame, and I'm saying air quotes shame for people if they felt any shame I'm not saying they should have, but there's less of that probably in 2024 than 2016. But he brought up something very interesting. And he said one of the reasons there wasn't a red wave in 2022 based on the vibes is that there is no way to pull new registered voters, right? And this is what I'm saying is that data point, no one knows about them. So that's what I always wondered, because clearly when Roe v. Wade was overturned, you heard about all of these new people registering to vote, right? Well, they're not going to be reflected in the polls. And clearly, a lot of those people registered specifically because Roe v. Wade was overturned. And then you saw there was no red wave, and they've basically flipped those abortion issues in every single state. So I just wonder if there's a bunch of new registered voters, and by the way, maybe they'll go towards Trump. I have no clue. But if all these people registered to vote because they liked Kamala or don't like Trump, or they're still pissed about Roe v. Wade, whatever it is, I do think you have a huge sect of voters that nobody really knows how they're going to cast their ballot.
Oh, absolutely. And that is why there's so much. Anyone who says this election is a shoo-in for one candidate or the other, I mean, yeah, maybe you'll be right if you say that. I just don't see any way you can back that up in the data. And this is why I said kind of what you were talking about. The vibes have gotten so far ahead of the data. Yes, there has been a shift toward Trump in the last week, but it's very minor. And I just saw this today. So President Adam Carlson, who I like to follow on X, he gives a lot of good information. He tweeted this chart out the other day. The presidential polling averages for 538, the New York Times, Silver Bulletin, Nate Silver, and Split Ticket. They all do polling averages. They're all very similar. They use slightly different methods, but the results are pretty much the same. All of them have Harris still ahead in their polling averages in Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania. Now, it is 1.2 or less in all of those, but they all have her ahead. And again, that's all she needs. If she wins those 3 states, she will be the president. And so why would it shock you if she wins those 3 states when she is leading in the polling average right now, albeit by a very slim margin in all of these major indexes? And that's why I said the vibes have gotten ahead of the data. Like, this election is a toss-up. It's where it has been pretty much from the start with Biden versus Trump before the debate. It looked like it was going to be a toss-up. And then when Harris got in, it looked like it was going to be a toss-up. And guess what? It still looks like it's going to be a toss-up. Reading the tea leaves to the point you made, I know people try to do this because we have so much early voting now, and they're trying to compare it to 2020 and what percentage, because you don't know how people voted, obviously, but you know the registration of the people that voted. So people try to read that all the Republicans are voting in higher numbers in Georgia or Pennsylvania. Look, first of all, 2020 was so dramatically different. So many people were scared they might die. And so they mailed in their vote. Now they may show up and vote. So Democrats, I think, are more likely to show up on election day. And by the way, Republicans have smartly embraced mail-in voting now.
Yes.
Trump has gone from saying it's a total fraud to actually telling people to vote by mail. So compare the people who do that, I just think there's very little credence in that. But I think what the underlying facts of, in a lot of these states, voter registration in the last couple years has favored Republicans, meaning Republicans have made a net gain in voter registration in many states versus 2020. And also, if you look at, I think it was Pew, it might have been Gallup, they do a huge survey of people every couple years, and they ask you, do you consider yourself a Democrat or Republican? One of the questions they ask. When that is done, it's done every election year in like August or September. It has in the past correlated very well with the national popular vote. So, for instance, if in 2012, roughly Obama's margin was roughly the same as the margin in this poll of people who said they were Democrat versus Republican. That poll this year, for the first time in a while, has more people saying they're Republican than Democrat. Not by much, but by a few points. If that holds true to what we've seen in the past, then obviously Trump would win, because we know Trump is going to win the election if he wins the popular vote. It'll probably be a blowout. So I think that's important to remember. And then the final thing I'll say about this is the point you made about the trying to overturn the election. Look, Trump was going to do that anyway. I mean, unless Kamala Harris won like Florida and Texas, Trump was going to do that no matter what. We know that. The question is, would he have any kind of shred of legitimacy? The answer to that is no, because there is no legitimacy, most likely, unless there is real fraud that can be proven. But would he have people willing to stake their reputation to back him, right? And I think the answer to that is yes. It is close enough, and he's doing well enough, and the vibes for him are good enough, and the betting markets for him are good enough that you know what's going to happen if Harris wins. They will claim victory probably right away on election night, even though we know that if it's a close election, it's going to take days to determine some of these states. Hopefully not as long as 2020, but it's going to take a while. And in that vacuum, he will step in. And they will try to say the election was stolen. We know this. I seriously want to know, is there any Trump voter out there who thinks if he loses, he will not try everything he can to overturn the result? I mean, honestly, I don't know how you possibly could think that. That's the reason why 2020 matters. Republicans get so mad. Why are you talking about 2020? The reason is because the same dude who tried to overturn the last election is 2 weeks away from maybe trying to overturn this one. That's why it matters. And I don't know if you saw this the other day. J.D. Vance at a rally. This was a rally. This wasn't even when he was being pressed by a reporter. He said this, quote, "On the election of 2020, I've answered this question directly a million times. No, meaning no, Trump didn't lose. I think there are serious problems in 2020. So did Donald Trump lose the election? Not by the words that I would use, okay? I really couldn't care less if you would agree or disagree with me on this issue. Here's the thing that I focus on, because what the media will do, they'll focus on the court cases or they'll focus on some crazy conspiracy theory. What verifiably I know happened is that in 2020, large technology companies censored Americans from talking about things like the Hunter Biden laptop story." He said think the vice presidential candidate of the United States said, for the Republican Party, said he doesn't think his running mate lost the election in 2020, even though we know that he lost. It's been everybody who's looked at this, every court that it's been in front of, Trump judges, and here we are years later. You'd think maybe they couldn't find the fraud right away, right? Maybe the fraud was so good that it took them a while. Well, it's been 4 years, and they still have produced nothing. And yet and J.D. Vance is not stupid, right? He's not, you could argue that Donald Trump maybe actually believes it, that he didn't lose. I don't know if he does or not, but I think you can make the argument he does believe it. I don't think you can make that argument with Vance. Vance is just an opportunist. And so many of these Republicans are. And it's just stunning to me. This would be disqualifying throughout most of American history that somebody would say this, that Trump would continue. If you would have told me after January 6th that Trump's going to make a political comeback and maybe win, I would have said no way, first of all. But then if you would have further said, not only is he going to have a chance to win and be the nominee, he's going to double down on January 6th and the election being a peaceful transfer of power, which is what he said the other day. It was a peaceful transfer of power, and that the election being stolen. Not only is he going to be the nominee and have a chance to win, but he's not going to walk away from this. He's going to embrace it. And he's going to say, I was right again, and talk about it all the time and not back down and equivocate. I would have said, that's crazy. The American people will never accept that. But here we are.
Well, he also has an entire media arm that forgot about that. And then I won't get into it. There was a very large settlement paid out about some of those issues, which we all know about, but that wasn't discussed necessarily on that network or to those folks. And whoever it is, whether it's Tucker Carlson or people on YouTube, they have sanitized January 6th, right? It's the same people that now think that all the protesters were let in the front door, right? They were let in. They were tourists. Right. They've changed the narrative. And there's a lot of people on their side, media-wise, that have pushed that also. And I also think just some people think Democrats are so bad, Kamala's so bad, Biden's so bad. I remember I told you this the day after that debate, Eric, and I've stayed this way the whole time. I just said, to me, it's disqualifying what Donald Trump did trying to overturn the election. I actually think Republicans probably deserve to win this election. I just don't think Donald Trump deserves to win this election. That's why I said way back, I wish it was DeSantis or Nikki Haley or whatever it is. But even I saying all those things and still believing them after I watched Joe Biden implode at that debate. Even I said, man, I think I still might want Donald Trump over Joe Biden. That
Oh
was
my
how
God.
seriously. No, but like if you're really thinking about the health and future of our country at that exact moment, I don't feel the same way. I think Kamala, she's of the right age. She's a normal politician. I'm not saying she's special, but I've
She's
said
good
this.
enough.
She's good enough. And again, I think the Republicans are on the right side of many of these issues. That's why if it was Nikki Haley or Ron DeSantis, I truly, really wouldn't care. I can admit, I think the Republicans are on the right side of a lot of these issues in 2024. But I will never not think that Donald Trump disqualified himself for what he did after the election up until January 6th. You will never change my mind on that. No one will.
No. Well, look, and here's the thing. It's hard. I don't know if I agree with you, even though I do maybe favor some Republican stances on some things, but I just think the Republican Party has been so tainted by Donald Trump that for me, it's impossible to separate them right now. Like, because any Republican has to say certain things like climate change isn't real or downplay it, or the 2020 election wasn't really stolen, or we should deport every illegal immigrant here. Like, there are things that I don't even know if they believe a lot of these things. I think some don't, but they feel like they have to say them now because that is what is acceptable in the Republican Party if you want a future. But I mean, just circling back to Vance for a minute, let's just take his argument at face value. So what he is saying is that you are right to not certify an election, which he says he would not have done if he was in Mike Pence's position, which would have, let's be clear what that would have done. That would have thrown our country into constitutional chaos 2 weeks before an election. We would have people in the streets, not just in DC, but in every city. That's banana republic shit. Like, that's what would have been the net result of not certifying the election, is a complete crisis of our constitutional democracy. That's what would have happened. And Vance is saying, and his justification is because of the Hunter Biden laptop story, which, again, we've talked about this before. I wish that X would not have minimized that for, what was it, a few days or a week? It wasn't even the whole time. It was for a few days or a week. You couldn't share it, and it was a, what do they call it? Dialed down, basically. So it wasn't getting the kind of exposure it was. I disagree with that. In hindsight, it was clearly the wrong move. But to say that because you disagree with a private company, remember, these are private companies. And you can't even say it was the government pressuring them because the government was led by Donald Trump at that time. So these private companies made decisions you disagree with. Therefore, we need to try to overthrow an election. I mean, that is crazy. I know it's been normalized now, but can you imagine if Kamala Harris loses and she's like, I don't like the way X and Elon Musk when he took over, and the way that it's turned into a right-wing conspiracy theory, which, let's be honest, it to some extent has. And look what they've done with the leaked, Iran hacked, we know this now, the Trump campaign, right? And what happened now? They shot that stuff around. You know what the supposedly liberal mainstream media did? They didn't print it. Remember what happened, by the way, in 2016 with Hillary Clinton's emails? They did print them.
And
those
Podesta?
were out in the domain. Yes, and Podesta.
Podesta, I'm sorry.
But, there was one person, or at least one, that did take that hacked Trump stuff and post it on Substack, I think. And you know what X did? They took it away. They didn't allow people to go to it, right? So what if Kamala Harris says, you know what? X took away those Iranian-hacked Trump campaign documents. That wasn't fair. So I'm going to try to overthrow the election now and make myself the president. Like, she's the vice president. Maybe she tries to do what Trump wanted Mike Pence to do in January 2021 and say, nah, I'm not going to do it. We're not certifying this election. Of course she would, we know she would never do that because she actually, is a decent person who cares about democracy. But this is what Vance is arguing. I know the issues are important. I know some people think that Republicans are better on the issues or Trump is better on the issues than Harris, but I can't get over that. I cannot get over it. I'm sorry. I will never get over people saying that whatever issue I care about or whatever personality I care about is more important than the country. is more important than the democracy and the election. And the fact that Vance, who again is a very smart guy and knows better, would say this kind of just absolute bullshit right before the election is just crazy to me. It is absolutely insane. And we just kind of gloss over it now like, oh, well, that's just Trump being Trump or Vance being Vance. It's not okay. It's not sane. It's just like, that's what matters. This other stuff is important, but that at the end of the day is what matters.
Well, that's why I've always thought, honestly, and I could be wrong. Look, Trump may just win and I'm wrong, and I'll admit it. But that's why I've always thought Harris was going to win slightly, is because of those actual moderate, reasonable people who thought that trying to overturn the election January 6th was a red line. And I think there's a large percentage of those people. Now maybe I'm wrong, and immigration is so bad. And here's something we haven't brought up enough on this particular show, although we have a lot on our show. The cost of just life these days, right? The cost of just living is really tough for people. And there are probably some people that are like, you know what? I don't love Trump. I don't like what he did for the election, trying to overturn it January 6th. But gosh dang, I can barely survive paycheck to paycheck, week in, week out. That's another obviously huge part of it. We didn't really talk about it today because we focused on immigration. We got to wrap up the show. I got to say one more thing, Eric, because we were talking about big tech companies, social media, X, Facebook, Hunter Biden laptop. I'm telling you, man, I think we're being shadow banned right now on our channel. On Everybody Settle Down. Something happened. I say
big
this.
Tech is after us.
I'm half joking. We had our best month ever in September. And you know what happened? I'm telling you, we did a live stream after the Walz Vance debate. I'm gonna repost this as a clip, and I'm gonna show you our views. And it was like this. And like nobody's, even now, 14 people are watching. We were getting way more views on our live streams. We're getting way more views on our videos. I don't think we've changed that much, Eric. I'm not saying we're the greatest, but I don't think we've changed, and we've actually grown. Something's going on. I'm not saying we're really being shadow banned. Like there's some type of, maybe we said a word we shouldn't have said. Maybe we put up somebody's comment that said something that we weren't supposed to put up on the screen, but something has happened. I have worked in YouTube for 3.5 years. It's my full-time job now. And with all the channels I run, I've never seen what's happened to our channel in the last 3 weeks or so. Something's up, YouTube.
Yeah, maybe this is what J.D. Vance is talking about. In this case, I totally agree with him. I'll real quick before we go, this is a good comment. Oh, my computer froze up. Just as
Which one? I'll read it, or I'll put it up.
It was about the electoral college split in the Fox News poll. Do you see that one?
Errol Spence Jr., yes.
He says in the Fox poll, it has Trump winning the national vote by 2, but Harris leading 6 of 7 battlegrounds. Harris losing the popular vote, but winning the electoral college would be the funniest thing ever. It really would. And look, it could happen. I think the probability of that is extremely low. I mean, all the data points we have suggest that the electoral college bias is pretty strong for Trump. Maybe not quite as strong as it was in 2016 and 2020, but strong. And so I think, but that would be, and you know exactly what would happen, right? Is the sides would flip. So now all the Trump people would be like, how can we have the electoral college? It should be decided by the popular vote. And all the Democrats would be like, the electoral college is not so bad. That's exactly what would happen. Because again, everything is now about what does my team want? Not everything, but most things. Let's just put on the jersey. And look, I think to your point about the numbers and everything, in all honesty, you and I have pretty strong opinions. I mean, everyone who's watched this knows I am not a fan of Trump, and I think it would be really, really bad for our country if he was elected again. But we are not like hardcore partisans. Like, I mean, I think Harris is fine. I like her. I think she's improved a lot. I think she'd be a pretty decent president. I think she would try to govern in the middle, especially because she'd be forced to with the congressional majorities the way they would be. But I don't think she's a transformative political figure. I don't think she's Ronald Reagan or FDR or even Barack Obama. But, my point is, you and I don't put the jersey on. We don't put our red and blue jersey on and then go to battle where everything then is filtered through that prism. And that has always been there. I want to be clear. I'm not saying that is a new phenomenon that just appeared, but it has never been like this Not in our lifetime. And if you go back in history, maybe around the time of like the Civil War and like time before that, when when there were super partisan media, like directly partisan. That may be the analogy for where we are now. Is that kind? And we don't have anything like, thank God, slavery, right? We don't have a threat of civil war. I know some people die. That's never going to happen, right? We don't have those things, yet we're getting back to that place, and that's beyond what you think of Trump or Harris or this election. That's just a really bad development for a democracy. It's not a healthy place to be.
Agreed. We'll end on that, but I'm going to stick with that fact that we're shadow banned. Okay, I'm just going to go with that. But then our guy Ace says, I just want to get back to loving Americans, all Americans. Okay, just because Chan the Man, he's been very prolific. I'll read his also. Chan the Man, here's an opinion you don't hear often.
Thank you. By the way, thank you, Chan. We appreciate your comments.
Thanks, buddy. He says, as a conservative, Reagan was a terrible president, and Nixon has been the best Republican in the last 100 years. Let's get to that on the next show, Eric, because, we're already at 70 minutes. Thank you, everybody, for watching. Please comment, like, subscribe. We'll be back next week. Hopefully, YouTube lifts their shadow ban, and we have thousands and thousands of people on the stream. Eric, we'll see you, buddy. Take care. Good stuff. End stream. End stream.